This video is going to be a little more angry than the ones before, because since the last video I've had some truly infuriating arguments on Twitter, with people who probably have never had to engage into a real argument before, because they only speak and listen to people who generally agree with them. As countless wise men and even more edgy teens on Reddit have said before, arguing with a smart person is difficult. Arguing with an idiot is impossible. The problem, however, is as soon as you stop arguing with the idiots and accept their idiocy, they essentially win because they can simply keep on living in their bubble in which no one ever tells them how much of an idiot they are. Many of you might think now, hey, hypocrisy detector. Maybe you're just the idiot and you just don't notice it. And yeah, maybe that's true. But if so, then at least I can accept that my opinion is not any more valuable than the opinion of the guys who disagree with me. The guys I'm going to mention in this video are not capable of doing that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're idiots, I'll leave that up to you. But their style of arguing is just infuriating. And this is not only due to the fact that they are not able to process any opinion that is not hammered into their brains already, but that they usually use a special argumentation tool that has been around for decades already, but which has gotten much more popular in the US since Donald Trump became president. It's called Whataboutism. Many people of my, let's say, more conservative fans, if you can call them fans, might say now, hey, I know what this is. Whataboutism is the tool a libtard uses when he's out of good arguments to blame Trump for something. And to every one of you who believes that, I can with full confidence say, yes, you are an idiot. Because it's the exact opposite of that, and by using this particular meme with this particular comment, then you're making an absolute fool out of yourself in front of everyone who knows what the term is referring to. So not all of you out there watching this video are idiots. But Larry, if you are watching, you are definitely an idiot. That being said, what is whataboutism? John Oliver has actually done a great job explaining this phenomenon in his The Trump Presidency video, released in September 2017. He explained it much better and much more entertaining than I can, so if you actually want to learn something while still being entertained, you should switch to his video now. Because what I'm about to show you in my video will mainly be just frustrating. But maybe, just maybe, you might want to come back to this video after watching John Oliver's show, because what he even did better than explaining what whataboutism was predicting how it would change the entire way of discussing things in the society. And after last week, I've got to admit, his prediction was probably the closest thing to a prophecy I've encountered during my lifetime so far. So let's finally get to it. The term whataboutism was first used in the 1960s as an ironic description about how the regime of the Soviet Union dealt with criticism about their way of leading the government. It referred to the phenomenon that the regime usually reacted to criticism by saying, yeah, we might do this bad thing, but what about that bad thing they do in Western countries? By this argument, they were justifying most of their own wrongdoing. But while the word whataboutism came up in the 1960s, the idea behind it is much older than that. It's essentially about all things people do sharing a moral equivalent, and because of that, all wrongdoings would have to be equally bad. This way, nobody would actually be allowed to criticize someone because there's no one who didn't commit any wrongdoings in his lifetime. Except Tom Hanks, of course. Tom Hanks is flawless. But back to this way of arguing, because it's not flawless at all. Let me give you an abstract example of how it works. There's Jim. Let's say Jim is sentenced to go to prison for killing someone. Yeah, okay, he did that. But what about the fact that the judge who sentenced him frequently cheated on his wife? Yeah, okay, he did that. But what about the fact that the wife once stole a bag of cigarettes at the grocery store? Yeah, okay, she did that. But what about the fact that the grocery store owner called Jim an asshole once? Yeah, okay, he did that. But what about the fact that Jim was sentenced to jail for killing someone? Yeah, okay, he did that. But what about, okay, I think you see what I mean. You can go on like that forever. And by using this method, you can argue that Jim, the judge, his wife, and the grocery store owner are all equally bad, and so none of them is allowed to criticize one of the other people, even if none of their crimes has anything to do with the crimes by the other three. You'll probably think now, man, that's incredibly stupid. There's no way that people would actually argue like that. Well, of course, this example is whataboutism in its final form of perversion. But if you take a closer look at the way politicians or the media keeps discussing things nowadays, you'd see that we are very close to getting there. This finally brings me back to Twitter, which is, after I've been using it for a month now, my favorite website in the world already. Here's how Laura Ingraham, someone who is paid $15 million a year for arguing with people, uses this method. Hillary Clinton: I can't believe I have to write this sentence, but the president's son-in-law doesn't get to decide when the election is. Laura Ingraham: You lost, and your Obama pals who tried to help your pathetic campaign are being exposed for what they truly are: frauds. See what she's doing? She takes the criticism by Clinton about how Jared Kushner should not be the one to dictate the date of an election, which is, if you think about it, very legitimate criticism, and reacts by saying that Hillary Clinton is not allowed to criticize that because she and her Democratic pals did something wrong in the past. Is it true that Obama and his friends did this? Maybe. Is Clinton salty because of her loss? Certainly. But does it have anything to do with the fact that she criticizes Jared Kushner? No. Do the crimes of Clinton, Obama and co. have anything to do with Kushner overstepping his authorities? Of course not. But according to Ingraham, both Clinton and Kushner are equally bad in this case, and so should not be allowed to criticize each other. Yeah, but what about the fact that Laura Ingraham invited Dr. Phil, who is not a medical doctor, on her show as a medical expert and let him do unfunded claims about what we should do about the coronavirus? Is she not allowed to criticize Clinton then? Of course she is, because it has nothing to do with the crimes Clinton committed. And she's not the only overpaid journalist who uses this method to build up her arguments. In his video, John Oliver shows Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson doing exactly the same by, for example, defending a Republican politician being accused for raping a 14-year-old girl by saying, "But what about the fact that Bill Clinton is a sexual predator?" Well, is he? Probably. Does this make the rape of a teenager by another grown man okay? Fucking no. John Oliver also shows different clips of politicians using the exact same method, including, of course, Donald Trump. And now we're getting to the real deal, because what John Oliver predicted was, as soon as the President of the United States starts using this method, shit will go down quickly, because many ordinary people would start following his example and see it as a legitimate way of arguing. And in my opinion, that's exactly what happened. I'd say in almost every argument I have on Twitter with one of the people who support Trump, sooner or later they base their arguments on the fact that people who opposed him are not being allowed to do that because they had done something wrong in the past too. Most of the Trump supporters do that from the start. I don't say that this is only a thing Trump supporters do. Everyone who says Biden should not be criticized for sexual misconduct just because Donald Trump is accused of committing sexual misconduct does exactly the same. In my opinion, it's just more common around Trump supporters because he does this far more often than other politicians, and the conservative media follows his lead. I'll give you now the 3 most notable experiences I had with whataboutism over the last 2 weeks and will break them down to you. They show that the curse of whataboutism has already infected the very core of society. Number 3. Corey Satterlee. I knew almost from the start what would happen if I started arguing with this one, so I made screenshots of what he said early on. Sadly, I forgot to screenshot the initial tweet, but here's what it said. He posted a screenshot of the claim that in the last election, 28 million voting ballots went missing due to the possibility to vote via mail. This very high number made me pretty curious, so I started a little research and found out that several news sources had already pointed out that this number of 28 million missing ballots is extremely misleading. 1/3 of those missing ballots could be attributed to states where you had to vote via mail, so they are not missing. They're just from people who chose not to vote. If you have an overall voter turnout of 50%, you can't just say 50% of the votes went missing. They just chose not to vote. Which brings me to the remaining 16 million missing votes. These 16 million people present about 13% of the people who requested a ballot, but didn't sign it, whatever the cause was. That brings us to a voter engagement of 87% in male voters, which is, compared to the overall turnout of 55% in the general election, a very good turnout. But many Republican candidates fear this bigger voter turnout, so they fight voting by mail by any means necessary and spreading news like this. But we're getting off topic now. Let's get back to Corey Satterlee. I confronted him or her with everything I just said and he replied the following. Yeah, debunked by a company owned by China. So what happened here? When I confronted him with this claim being misleading, he just said, yeah, okay, it is. But what about the fact that the news outlet who reported it was bought by a Chinese company? Is this true? Yes. Has this anything to do with all of the arguments I just made? Of course not. They stay exactly the same no matter who reports it. After that it got pretty bizarre, because I sent him several other sources and pointed out that the source he was referring to was word for word taken from a real politics article too. The exact same company he just had condemned of being a Chinese propaganda tool. The article I had sent him was their response, where they admitted that their initial claim was false and explained their error in great detail. So if you followed Corey Satterley's logic, the whole claim he was making would be worthless because it was made by a website which is owned by a Chinese company. Is their claim invalid because of that? Of course not, but they already explained that they were wrong. Anyway, I confronted him about that and included several other sources explaining what went wrong. He then tweeted this: "And I'm sure all of those have CCP propaganda ties as well. Yes, even you can be a hypocrite. Go away with your bad debunking skills. Anyone with a brain can see through your crap." So he just keeps following his argument that they should not be allowed to criticize anything because they may have ties to the Chinese government. So his way of arguing is getting even worse now because it's now only based on speculation. I then decided, for the sake of the argument, to agree that all of them were liars because they were tied to the CCP, but asked him to just explain to me why they were wrong in this particular article. His response was the following: "I don't have time to play dumb games with dumb people. If you can't see that we are being attacked by CCP propaganda on a daily basis, then you need to go to do some research before you try to correct other people with your nonsense." Then he blocked me. See what is happening? Guys like him are so convinced that whataboutism is a legit way of arguing that they just label any way of rational arguing as stupid games they don't want to play because they don't know how it is played. And this way of thinking is directly connected to the fact that Donald Trump legitimated it by using this method all the time. If everyone starts to think like that, our society is doomed. Number 2. Dennis MT18 and Alec Destry. It's pretty funny to check his Twitter feed every 2 or 3 days and to point out some of the incredibly misleading things he puts out in his free time. Like many Trump supporters, he doesn't know how to deal with this because all of his friends who follow his Twitter feed just agree with him without double checking any of his claims. This time he retweeted a picture I have seen on Twitter countless times already with this ingenuine commentary: "Really, Mayor? Really? You fucking hypocritical bastard. You piece of shit." So what is this picture about? It compares 2 tweets by Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. In one of them he encourages Muslim people to get halal meals for Ramadan at one of the countless meal grab-and-go stations all over the city. In the other one he condemns a big Jewish gathering and says that they will see no mercy when they dare to try something like this again. Damn, this guy just really hates Jews, doesn't he? Well, it's not that simple. Let's examine what both tweets are about. The Muslim tweet is about encouraging people to go to a grab-and-go station so they can celebrate Ramadan in social isolation at home. These stations would have been open anyways, they just increased their number of halal meals by 25%. Also, it's not possible to gather there because it's takeaway only, and they can always limit the number of people who are in there at the same time. So he's not encouraging Muslims to gather in the street as Dennis MT18 tries to put it. The other tweet is about de Blasio's condemnation of a Jewish funeral of around 2,500 people, which were flooding the streets shoulder to shoulder, and many of them without masks, as a New York Times article puts it. So I think it's pretty fair to condemn this, even if it is kind of biased that he explicitly mentions Jews, because it sounds like they're the only ones violating social distancing guidelines. So I confronted him about it and sent him an article with pictures of this Jewish gathering. His friend quickly jumped in and said this: "You expect me to believe anything that leftist NYT rag puts out? Especially considering I have many examples of the following where it's clear MSM tries to further the leftist communist agenda." So again, let's break it down. He said, yeah, okay, they reported that. But what about the fact that some other reporter someday made a misleading claim about the price of disinfectant on Amazon? Is this true? Yeah, I guess it's really hard to tell what the fuck is happening in this picture. But does this prove in any way that this article, which includes pictures of the gathering, is lying? Of course not. But for many people out there, this is the only proof they need. And to all of you who think that way, I just want to say, what the fuck is wrong with your brain? Are you really that stupid? Okay, calm down. I then posted an article of Fox News, who is, to put it mildly, at least as subjective as the New York Times, but in a conservative direction, while the New York Times tends to bias into the liberal direction. The Fox News article, however, featured pictures of the same gathering as well, where I can see exactly that it was hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder, many of them without masks. Alec Destry, however, wasn't listening anymore but just started following up statements about how social distancing guidelines were just part of the communist agenda to destroy America, and how I followed their plan. When I tried to ask him what he thought we should do about the social distancing guidelines then, he just repeatedly refused to give a proper answer. Luckily, his friend Dennis MT18 stepped back in that moment and said the following: "I'll give you my answer to that. Social distancing with everyone wearing a mask is as stupid as you can get. Make change with the clerk and maintain social distancing? He and others just touch the money that I put in my pocket. Just take orders from others is the goal. And that's how you actually do an argument. Claim what your position is about social distancing and why. I can get behind that. Good job, Dennis." The problem is, this doesn't have anything to do with his initial claim that Bill de Blasio is a hypocrite. And when Dennis MT18 responded to my criticism about that, it was the following: "Okay, Mr. Hypocrisy Detector, how many people are allowed in churches at one time? How many people parked in a parking lot and staying in their cars are allowed? How many imams are being threatened with arrests and fines? Shut the fuck up, I'm done with you." So let's break down the whataboutism again. You can probably do it by yourself by now. He says, yeah, okay, they attended an illegal gathering. But what about the guys who get arrested when they attend an illegal gathering in a church or in a parking lot? Why are there no imams being arrested? Is this true? Well, this time no, because the rules for religious gatherings are exactly the same for any religion in New York State, and the arrest of a priest he's referring to happened in Florida, which has completely different rules than New York. But that's not even the point. The point is that again you try to make your argument by claiming that the people who criticize this particular gathering have been wrong some other time, even if that has nothing to do with the initial argument. Do you understand my point now, Dennis? You can insult me as much as you want, I will continue to point out if you're making unfounded claims about something. Like and subscribe so that you don't miss anything. Number 1. Trump 2020, Pence 2024. The argument with this guy, whom you might recognize from my previous videos, was initially about why he had completely misunderstood Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. It went on for hours and there are so many examples of whataboutism that it would take weeks to break them all down to you. So I'll give you just the best of and let you figure out the whataboutisms by yourself. When I told him how Medicare for All planned to make the government responsible of the healthcare system and by that reduce the cost for people who can't afford healthcare to a minimum, he replied the following: "The more the government interferes in anything, the worse it gets. Our medical care, our insurance, our schools. Now they are interfering in every daily activity we have, including restricting religion. Did governors include mosques?" So he said, yes, maybe it does. But what about the government interference into schools and religion? Is this true? Maybe. Does this have anything to do with my argument about Medicare for All? No. When asked why I changed from a system who covers everyone differently for horrendous costs to a system that would cover everything basic for a much lower cost was such a bad idea, he said the following: "Seems those elites in Germany won't get into the state-run Medicare for All. Those that can will buy private insurance. Do you think there's a reason?" So he essentially said, yeah, maybe it would do that. But what about the system in Germany where the rich people are still able to get better healthcare? Is this true? Only partially. I live in Germany and yes, we have a public health insurance for everyone, which covers anything basic, and private insurances, which give you a little special treatment for much more money. And this system has been heavily criticized. But Bernie Sanders' system wouldn't be like that. It would eliminate all of these private insurances, but still offer the possibility of getting an upgrade, which would cost you a little more, but still significantly less than most people pay now. Do the flaws the German system has have anything to do with Bernie Sanders' plan being a radical improvement for many people in the US? No, it doesn't. Over the next few hours, our discussion went over Bernie Sanders' proposal being dumb because of Obamacare, which Sanders had nothing to do with, having flaws, then to Bernie's system being a danger to our democracy because communistic regimes in the past were essentially dictatorships, which finally led us to the argument that Bernie Sanders was essentially the same as Hitler, Mussolini or Stalin, because Sanders is calling himself a socialist. This of course ignores the fact that 2 of these dictators were fascists and 1 of them a communist, while none of them was a socialist, but whatever. I've gotta say, it was a wild ride from disagreeing with Medicare for All to supporting the claim that everyone who wants to make a change in the system essentially wants a communist dictatorship. But as I explained in the beginning, this is how the brain of someone engaging in whataboutism works. Everyone did something wrong once, so everyone is a hypocrite, so no one should be allowed to criticize anyone. In my opinion, this way of thinking is extremely dangerous because it makes it impossible to engage into rational discussions and pushes the door wide open for authoritarian politicians like Putin, Xi, or, in a way, Donald Trump. Because when the majority of people really starts to believe that no one is actually allowed to criticize anything the government is doing, then the government can essentially do whatever they want. Do you really want this to happen? I don't think so. So maybe, just maybe, you want to think about what whataboutism means first, before you start making fun about people accusing you of engaging in it. Because maybe in a few years, you won't be able to make fun of anything anymore. Better mark my words.